Welcome everyone. We're very glad that you're here. I'm Amy Brooks-Cal. I am one of the co-directors of the CNCDP. I can pronounce our program, K-12 program. And we're very excited to have Rick McGee with us today. Just a public service announcement before we start. Our next webinar after this is going to be on July 15th, 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, with Heather Fullerton, who's going to speak about clinical trials and how to become involved in clinical trials. So please get that on your calendar now. It will be another great webinar. And thank you to Brenda Porter and Amber for arranging the webinars. I think they have been great, and I hope that you have found them as educational as I have. So today, again, we are extremely fortunate to have Rick McGee join us. Rick is the Associate Dean for Professional Development and Professor of Medical Education and Associate Dean for Professional Development at Northwestern University Feinberg School of Medicine. Rick has had a long academic career at many academic institutions, which you'll hear more about for him. But and in addition, spent some time working at NIH, and for the last 12 years has been at Northwestern as a faculty coach, and again, an associate dean for professional development. He's also a PI on numerous grants from several different NIH and other federal institutes. So he's got a huge amount of experience in grant preparation and grant writing and approaches, and we are fortunate today that he is going to share his expertise with us. So with that, I will remind everyone except Rick, who is going to be speaking, to please mute your microphones so that we don't have background noise that makes it hard to hear Rick, and then I will turn it over to Rick.
All right, thanks very much. And I'll presume that someone will give me the high sign if you can't hear me at this point. We did a sound check before, it seemed to be working. So great to be here.
It's great here.
Good, super. Yeah, and it's always, you wonder, where are people? So when we're talking about with Amy and Brenda, where are you? Because you never know anymore. You have this institution. So I happen to be looking at, just to give you context, I'm sitting at a picnic bench inside of our little family cabin at a lake, looking out at a lake near Stillwater, Minnesota. So it's amazing what this world has allowed us to do in terms of the loss of a lot of things that have in the last few years, but the last few months, but it actually given us quite a bit of extra potential. So I'm going to get quite a bit to cover, and happy to do it. And it's actually a topic I love to talk about. But I would say I'm going to try to leave room and even at times break for questions. Just give you a break from listening to me for ramble on for 90 minutes. So keep track of those. If you want to put them into the chat, I probably typically won't be kind of looking at chat and my screen at the same time, but I'll take some breaks, or Brenda or Amy or anybody, if you want to look for those, and we can take a break periodically, and then hopefully at the end we'll have time as well. So as was mentioned, I've kind of, if you think a long career is another way of saying I'm old, is another way of looking at it, but I've been in a lot of different places. But I like to kind of give just a little background, because it kind of gives us context of how I've gotten to this idea of thinking about grant writing, and how you move from something that you kind of, well, you figure it out if you're going to survive, into no, it's one of those skills that's actually best to really consciously teach. And that's kind of what you'll see. What we're really doing here is kind of introduction to a really formalized way of teaching and learning that I'll introduce you to as we get into it as well. So I started out life as a lipid biochemist way back when, and in those days, back in the dark ages, I had 2 years as a postdoc at NIH, and then I had to find a job. On the one hand, it's totally scary. On the other hand, is like, for many of you are thinking, wow, that would be lovely. But that's how different things were back there. Then, as Amy mentioned, I've actually been at a number of different universities and institutions. It's been a great opportunity to try a lot of different things. Started out at Georgetown, pharmacology. Actually, I used to be a cellular neurobiologist. I learned how to do patch clamping when patch clamping was just being developed, from that standpoint. So I have a long kind of identity with neuroscience as well. Then I gradually moved into really more of kind of research I don't call it administrative, but research learning and research training. And spent a number of years working with different PhD and MD PhD programs, but became more interested rather than just kind of running them into kind of thinking about them. This idea of how you actually systematically develop scientists. And when I was at the Mayo Clinic, one of my life chapters, out of random events, I was from Rochester, Minnesota. I was at a cocktail party for a double AMC in Washington, D.C., and ran into an educational researcher from Arizona. And we got to talking, and some of the things I was doing said, "Oh, you're doing ethnographic interviewing." I had no idea what she was talking about, but literally that chance encounter completely shifted the direction of my career into actually looking at and studying how scientists develop, which is a lot of you'll be hearing the forums. I'm probably one of the few people in the world that have actually been at NIH funding for biophysics and sociology and social science. So it's given me an unbelievable opportunity to kind of really look at research and development for many different ways. Spent about 3.5 years back at NIH in the intramural program, and then I came to Northwestern now almost 13 years ago, really to create a new position. So my title is Associate Dean for Professional Development. It's just a fancy name for basically, I have this great job of being a faculty coach. So I get to work with junior faculty as they're moving into their faculty positions and moving from training into starting their independent program. But a lot of that really focuses on grant writing, as you'd expect. And so we've had the time, dedicated time. So now I is helping people. This is my job, as opposed to mentoring is typically a hobby. So, I'm paid full time to essentially work with faculty in these and develop these processes, which has allowed me to think about this in very different ways. You can put in time, you can try things, you can think about it in different ways. But as I mentioned, I've actually, as also Amy mentioned, still have a number of grants working on, including one which has been studying with a longitudinal large number of qualitative interviews of young scientists as they develop. So again, a wonderful opportunity, amazing chance to do a lot of things along the way. But because of this is kind of sets the context of what you hear from me is how you begin to think about grant writing as a highly specialized skill that you actually get taught and you learn, as opposed to something, well, I hope I have a mentor somewhere along the way that gives me some help. So that's why this will be an introduction of thinking about this into a structured process. So before I jump into that, so think a little bit about, how have you become a scientist, or how are you becoming a scientist? And think about the idea of what environments have really shaped you in that way. For those who are clinicians, you will have had clinical training and clinical experiences. You'll have different levels of amount of time you spent in becoming a scientist. But the question is, how has that happened, and where has it happened? So think back to this point. What's really shaped you? And if we had more time, it's fun actually to kind of talk about that. But there's a whole range of places where you may have kind of encountered, like, what is it to be a scientist? How do you become that person? Were any of those environments particularly welcoming and helpful? Are these ones that really, you felt like you walked in, you were welcome, and all of a sudden you're learning a lot and knew what was going on? By contrast, where they were not inviting. Many times people encounter environments where you feel like you're being watched or judged, and you have to literally prove yourself along the way, and many times on an ongoing basis. So in essence, the question is, how do you learn how to act in research settings, both from the standpoint of things we do as scientists, but literally how you act. I mean, it's if you think about it, you in one setting, people may be fairly formal. The other setting may be totally informal. You have radios going, all these things incredibly varied across the research world. And the way of thinking about that is actually, it's a fascinating concept that is developed by a couple of individuals, and leads to something called communities of practice. I'm introducing this kind of social science model to help you understand why I'll be talking about the structure and the way of thinking about writing in a very stylized and structured way. So communities of practice came out of the work of Lave and Wenger, who really studied how groups work. And largely they did it within a work setting. So work groups, how do they work? How do they operate? How do they actually, bring in new people? And how do they continue to grow and develop? So, work groups that fundamentally of a community of practice is defined by a passion or a goal, something that people are working on together. And within that, you have a shared interest or domain. And within that, you have, elements of competence. So competence is defined by techniques, beliefs, how you talk, how you act, what you wear. Literally, these are things that it's a social environment within a community that's working together. And within that community, you're always interacting and learning from each other. And because of that, you develop this concept of shared practices. And these can be very unique to each group. There may be some that are very common across groups. There may be some that are really quite different. But these relate to methods, tools, kind of a shared ways of doing and knowing things. But now become a member of a community of practice, they operate as if you have to become seen as legitimate to be a real member of a community. So some communities, they immediately accept people into their groups. Other communities say, well, you got to kind of prove to us that you belong, that you're really legitimate. And because each group operates in these ways, largely a way of kind of demonstrating competence and legitimacy, you have to many times figure out, well, what does that mean? What does that look like? And it's really developed about the perception of competence with the practices. So there are different ways of actually, this being applied. And because again, it's a social organization, it's a social being, and so different rules may apply to different types of group members. My guess is you're hearing this and saying, oh yeah, I can remember this, I know what you're talking about, because we've all experienced it. And it really does draw on the power structure of a group, and as well as wider society. So a lot of the power structures that come with race, ethnicity, class, and gender, all the things we're struggling with even more intensely today, these all come into play and have a role, many times an invisible role within a community of practice. So, think about what is a community of practice for scientists. Well, I mean, you can think of all the biomedical sciences that hold this massive, big, community of practice, which it has a lot of those elements. You can have a PhD program or a research group will behave like a community of practice, many times very differently from one to the other. Medical and science disciplines, also as specialties, act in different ways to begin to see that how these operations take place. But there really are challenges for newcomers. So in a sense, you are all newcomers trying to break into this community of scientists, in a totally different way, expanding up your level of expertise. And the problem is many times you practice rules are invisible. So the work habits, social expectations, they're very seldom written down. Although when we teach mentoring practices, we actually talk very much about how you make habits and practices explicit so people know what they are, not consistent between groups. Um, Many times these different behaviors, they're really not malicious or even conscious, but sometimes unconscious or even conscious biases can really come into play and untested assumptions can be played out. Talk about pedigrees. People say, well, where did you go to school? Oh, I've never heard of that school before, but like, oh, wow, you came from there. So all of these things are playing into how we see and how we are experiencing an environment. So there really are some really good strategies to lessen marginalization. These have listed them there, the whole idea of having a group explicitly define itself and bringing in providing guidance to groups, making the invisible visible. So essentially what we're doing today is giving you more of insights in some of the invisible aspects of moving into this community of practice of scientists. And you're trying to become a member of this unique community of practice called NIH funded scientists. So that community behaves as in a certain way. It has certain expectations. So that's why all you'll be hearing, how do we shift into teaching and learning mode to help you complement the mentoring you're getting in your various spaces. So that's, the introduction to why we're doing what we're doing today. But some starting tenets, when you think about proposal writing, whether it be a K, whether it be an R, whatever it is, whether for a non-federal funding agency, you have to think about writing proposals is not time away from science. It's absolutely integral to doing good science. It's a way we move from doing experiment to doing science. So I know at times it feels like, I'd rather just be doing things. Well, yeah, you just got to get used to it because it's really the systematic writing and describing is absolutely critical. And this grant writing process is a complex skill. So if you feel like you don't know how to do it, if you haven't had experience before, the way you should know how to do it. So not knowing how to do it is absolutely normal. And that's why we move into this teaching and learning model. But again, got to keep in mind that if you accept high quality writing, no matter how good it is, will seldom cover up weak or inadequately developed science. So as you're going through the writing process, as we go through the writing group, so for example, next Monday I'll be starting 5 writing groups of junior faculty. Each one will have 4 to 5 people in it. Each one will meet 90 minutes a week for the next 3 months. As we develop those proposals, we are developing the science as much as the writing. Because at the end of the day, significance and impact of the science trumps all. You've got to be able to think about this as the importance of the science is going to be driving it. K is a very unforgiving, application, because it can typically, nothing can do except bring you down from the standpoint of all the elements as we talk through them. But the science has to be there, in all aspects of it. So when we talk about this as a complex skill, think about how much you have to master before you can kind of sit down and say, well, I think I'm going to write a K proposal. Well, you have to have come a long way of complex integration of knowledge. You have to have all these things. You have to move from writing papers, which is describing the past in a very narrow little framework where you wonder how many people are going to ever be interested in the paper I'm writing, into these broader aspects of proposing something for the future. It's a big step. But we've seldom talked about this as a concrete skill. So for example, I was incredibly lucky. The first department chair I had when I went to Georgetown, he felt his only reason for being a chair was to be able to help people like me get funded. So he would not let a proposal go out of that department until he had been over it and over it and over it. And just to tell you how old I am, and that was in a handwritten document with red pencil markups that come back, you say, would come back so red, it looked like been bled on. But that was a role of teaching through this iterative feedback process. But more often, you maybe I'm sure have gone to a grant writing workshop, and I used to do those when I was at the Mayo Clinic. I could fill 1,000 person in auditorium. But at the end of the day, people came up going, okay, now I know what I don't know how to do. Now, how do I actually figure out how to do it? And so there's largely been hoping that mentors will help in this process. But the informal mentoring process is incredibly idiosyncratic with a high risk of variability that it's taught. And sometimes actually we run into scientists who actually have either a tacit or an explicit belief that says that, well, I figured it out, therefore you have to figure out in order to make sure you belong, which really makes no sense whatsoever. It's just absolutely a stupid, kind of way of developing talent, in my opinion. So you're really learning to write for a studies section that represents a community of practice, and that's what we're going to be exploring. So what do you have to achieve in a K? All right, so you're writing for these reviewers. You have to demonstrate what you're doing is important, feasible, logical next step, and hopefully innovative, novel. And I purposely have their hopefully innovative novel because, as you'll see, innovation plays much less of a role in a K proposal than it does, say, in an R01 in particular, because innovation may mean high risk. Well, if you've got a few years to develop and come up with essentially an R01, you don't really afford to take high risk. That being said, it can't be mundane. You have to show you understand the field. You have to show that you really know with a precise niche. And you have to show your mentors are the ones that are helping you move into that field. You have to show you're working in the field, preliminary data. You have to show that what you've done in the past predicts the future. Everything you'll see as we talk about you, and as you talk about you as an experiment in operation, it's a matter of what do you tell the reviewers from the past that gives them confidence of what you will do in the future. That's what you're trying to show. And basically, a K award is nothing more than a pathway to an R1. In a very crass way, it's like, well, why should we fund you if all you do is get a K and then you're going to fizzle out? So reviewers are really looking at the logic and the probability that what you want to do, and you will now take this and move it into an R01 award. That being said, the conversion from K awards to R01s in independent groups is not all that high. It's depending on how you different numbers you look at. So it's a big challenge. I'll talk about that in a minute. but that is the philosophy of what you're trying to convince. You have to write an incredibly crystal clear way where every word has a purpose. Literally in the grant writing groups that we work out, we start out with a big picture, but by the time we're down, near the end, we literally are talking at the word level. And from, well, I hear this, when my brain hears this word, this is what it's thinking. I don't think this is what you really are meaning. Is that the right word? We literally will be down to the word level. So basically, what you're trying to do is convince the reader that you are a legitimate new member of this elite NIH-funded research community of practice. And that's what I do. So you want to act, talk, feel, look, and breathe like the other people in the group. After you've gotten your 10th R01, then fine, you can probably write anything you want and you're going to get funded. But as you're getting started, you want to be able to mimic and you want to be able to model the expectation of the people who are reading it. So it's then, oh, okay, she writes just like I do. She must be pretty good and she must be getting pretty good mentoring. So there's a good starting point. So that's the logic between kind of replicating. Oh, am I back?
Oh, yes. I was about to worry. Yes, you are back, Rick. We can hear you. I don't see your slides yet.
Okay, let's see. I may have to share my screen again. And while it's sharing, let me go grab my phone as a backup just in case. Getting messages of it being unstable, but I didn't know how unstable. Can you see the slides now?
Not yet.
Okay. I'm going to grab my phone. Be right back.
Okay. All right. So everybody just hang on for a minute. And well, this is the difficult part about transmitting from northern Minnesota. Although I have the same problem with my internet here in suburban Denver. So there we go. We can see it now.
Okay, give me just a second. Can you see the slides now, Amy?
We can.
Okay. We'll stay with there. If I get a bad one more time, I'll switch over to my hotspot, my phone. Okay?
Okay.
All right. Just do I need to go backwards or anything, or is it okay until just all of a sudden lost it?
It just was like one moment and you just cut out. So
Okay.
I think we're okay. Was not a long process.
We got plan B in the set now too. Okay. So writing for reviewers really starts by understanding the review process. I'm just going to touch on that just briefly. Oh, I got to go back to my other one. Okay. So you're writing for reviewers. Everything we do, we're writing for peer reviewers. But you have to start with what they're used to seeing, what they want to see, the criteria they're using to judge, how they approach their task. And it's really understanding these and writing to what they're expecting is the first step in showing that you're really legitimate and that you really know what's going on. You're coming from the right kind of background. Because basically what you have to do is turn the reviewer into your advocate. So if you're not familiar with the NIH process right now, typically, a reviewer, if they're reading K applications, they may realize that, okay, roughly a quarter of the applications I review, and this may be a little different with the K-12, but in general, you're talking about somewhere between 10 and 20% of applications that are being reviewed are going to get funded. So basically, the reviewer is just trying to decide which of those that I have am I going to advocate for. That I'm going to actually spend my social capital among my colleagues to say, hey, this is something that's really worth looking at closely. If they don't do that, if they're advocating for everybody, very quickly their colleagues turn them out. They tune them out. They basically said this person can't differentiate good from bad. So therefore, they really have to do it. So you have to convince the reviewer your work is very important. and that you are worth investing in. That's even at this point for K as much or important as the research, because basically a K is funding a person, and so the person is the one that is being developed and seeing where it's going to go. So the science has to be there, but the person as well. But the tricky part is that you're writing for different kinds of reviewers. And that's to see as we talk and go forward, we're thinking about this all the time, where I'm expecting that I'm writing such that I have an expert in the field who probably, when you're just getting going, knows as much or more about the field as you do. You have to a sophisticated non-expert, someone who's in the field, but not in the precise niche you are, and then many times a skilled scientist who may not know a lot about your specific topic. So this is particularly critical at a K award level, because K panels are very broad, but not very deep. They're fairly shallow because they have to have reviewers that can cover a whole broad array of science within a given review panel. Sometimes you'll have technical experts. So for some proposal of non-scientists. So if you're writing something like a PCORI, Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute grant, you actually have non-scientists. So it's again, you're writing for reviewers and you're specifically thinking about metacognitively, what are they thinking, what are they expecting, how are they going to be looking at. So you have to write in such a way that all of these review types can get excited about what you're doing. And that's where it really becomes an art, but it's also science. And that's what we'll introduce you to in a few minutes. If you're not familiar with the grant review process, there is some, NIH has some cool videos that really are good reenactments of what really goes on. Gives you some idea of the difference between, written reviews and what happens out of review panels as they get together. So the key with any kind of writing for review is you have to know the review criteria, because the review criteria are reviewers are essentially commenting on. So for an R-type award, here you have the overall impact, the score that really matters, and then you have what we call component scores for each of these 5 criteria. So reviewers will give a score between 1, which is perfect, to 9, which is, why did you bother me? This is so awful, for each of these categories. And then they come up with an integrated ultimate score that leads to the impact score. So you really are writing to review criteria, and you'll see in a minute, but the review criteria are very different for K awards. But here is, just again, think of it, because you also have words behind these. So what does significance mean? And you do have, and its significance is in the brains of the reviewer if it isn't a specific criteria, for example, of a K award. Does the project address an important problem or a critical barrier to progress in the field? Okay, is this critical? Is there a barrier? What is the barrier? Where is the field stuck? How will this move the field forward? Notice it's the field, not all of solving Alzheimer's disease. If the aims of the project are achieved, how will scientific knowledge, technical capability, and our clinical practice be improved? How will completion of the aims change the concept, methods, technologies, treatments, etc.? So these are words behind criteria. So as you're thinking about any time you're writing a proposal of any kind, you're looking at for what are the criteria. I have these, just you can look at them. These are not my words, these are NIH's words, and you look at them from the standpoint of, so they're here significant, is it important? The investigators, are they the right people to do it? Innovation, is it novel? Is it something new? Approach, how are they going to do it? Environment. So all these are important, but for our programs, our awards, it turns out that the significance and the approach are the 2 that correlate most closely with the ultimate impact score. Now look at how different the criteria are for the K, and this is what we're going to focus on, much more than the R. These are now the 5 categories of which you will get a score from 1 to 9, 1 being perfect to 9 being awful, for each of these 5 criteria. Notice how different they are from the R. And that's why most of the time any kind of review panels will not mix any longer reviewing both K and R proposals. It's one or the other, because otherwise your brain cognitively, you can't flip from going to an R to a K and back and forth. It just doesn't work. And in this case, all of these criteria are important. So you literally have to approach a K as none of these is less important. And any one of them, if you don't absolutely address it spot on, all it can do is kill you. You know, you just literally can't afford to think of any of them as less important than any else. All right, so let's look at it. So here are, you know, KOA, K23, all the K, they're pretty much the criteria are the same, you know, and so these, again, the NIH words for candidate. Does a candidate have the potential to develop as an independent and productive researcher? Okay, now role play. You're sitting on a study section and you're now reading your application, asking for, well, how do I identify potential? How do I say this person has potential? Okay, publications, past history, things like that. But the question is, just having publications doesn't tell you what role you've played in that publication. So potential really as an independent and productive researcher. Independence means you think independently, you come up with new ideas, you problem solve, you fix things that no one else knows how to fix. You know, so it's a matter of how you actually capture that, and that's where the contributions to science, for example, in the biosketch become absolutely critical in that regard. Prior training and research experience appropriate, okay? You know, if this, you're applying for a K and this is really your first chance to do research, it's gonna be a big leap because the reviewers say, well, it's nice, we believe you might wanna do this, but are you gonna like it? Are you gonna enjoy the fact that for the first 6 months or 9 months, you get no data? You're going to go running, screaming from the laboratory, or you're going to just, you know, double down and say, I'm going to solve this no matter what. They're looking for evidence that you've been in enough research environment and that, you know, changes with application type. Again, ideas of the other pieces down there. Letters of reference, how do they actually speak to this as well? So what does this look like? You're telling your story. You're providing the reviewer data about you. And it's got to go beyond platitudes. Too often we see, and I still working with the faculty I work with, that, well, I'm 100% committed to a career as an independent scientist. Okay, that's nice. I know you have to write that now. Tell me something that makes me believe you. Anybody can write that. So you're looking for evidence of how you got there. You're looking for the evidence of things you've done in the past. And again, it goes beyond just a listing of you know, it's really the logic, the thinking that goes into it. Each step along your pathway, I would argue, either is part of a personal plan or it has an explanation. So many times people say, well, I'm moving into a new field. I don't have any publication in that field yet, but I'm absolutely turned on by it. Okay, tell me why. Tell me what happened for you to see this is something that absolutely, this is the most fascinating problem I've ever encountered. I want to solve it. So I'm looking for evidence on how that came about. Solving technical difficult problems is extremely important. You know, especially if lab-based, you're solving things day in and day out. You know, when I was in the lab, actually, that's one of the things I enjoyed most. I ended up, you know, doing technical stuff that no one else was crazy enough to try to see if they could get it to work. But I enjoyed that, and they opened up things that other people couldn't look at, and so that was more of the type of work we found interesting. Any evidence you have that others have recognized or built on your work, that becomes the impact. If you've had bumps or delays, okay, explain them. Don't meet or guess. Well, you know what? Life happens, as we've all encountered so much. So the question is not what was a problem you encountered. That's an important question. But the real question is, what did you do about it? So for example, I worked with someone one time, was an international person who had come to the US. You know, he was here training. Something happened in his country. He had to leave to go home to take care of family, you know, needed him, and then came back. And then he'd gotten into it, wanted to write a grant, but he didn't want to say that it happened. For me, it's like, no, no, no. The fact that you went away, that's what happened first. What's important is you're back. Okay, don't think about it. It's how you adapt. It's what you do with things that come along the way that matters. Again, it's often difficult to write about yourself, and this is again one of the things that many times you getting feedback in terms of how does it sound? How do you hit the balance between here's the data versus being, you know, bragging or name dropping or overblown? It's a fine line, but this one where most people, you have to step out and say, no, I'm good. You know, basically, I'm good. I've encountered things. I've made a contributions. Here I am, folks. I'm ready for the next step. Career development plan, career goals and objectives. Here's the linking, you know, the words that NIH says about that the reviewers are judging it. What's the likelihood that the plan will contribute substantially to your development? Become, guess what? There's that scientific independence thing. If there's one theme that keeps going over and over through all this, it's scientific independence. That's the goal. Some of them are similar to the past. Are the content, scope, phase, and duration of the curriculum plan appropriate when considered in the context of prior training? One of the biggest things that people many times stumble with K is realize that it's about your career development as much or more than the science you'll produce. And I always describe it as, particularly for career development, is you literally are starting backwards from, okay, after this K, at whatever the next step is going to be, particularly like if it's a full-fledged K, the outcome is an R1. Okay, if the outcome is an R1, what's the pathway that's going to get me there? And how are you going to be different? The other thing that you got to keep in mind, a K award is about development and becoming different, being able to do things that you can't do right now. If, say a K-12 is 2 years before applying for K-23, then what is the development that's taking place during that time? Be ready for more K. If you're further along, the K-12 is the polishing off and basically, okay, at the end of this 2 more years, maybe 3, I'm ready to write my R, then that's a different storyline and your career development. But it's got to be something you're going to be better than you are today, something different than what you are based on what you want to do after the K award. So you start with it basically, I say start with a destination, then you work backwards. Have to be new ones that must be real and meaningful. And they must apply to what you want to do. I've run into folks sometimes that, well, I really want to learn, I really want to know how, GWAS works. Okay, that's nice. Are you going to use it? No, but I really want to know how it works. Don't do it. It'll never fly, because reviewers only are interested if the development applies to the research you're doing and need to be doing in the future. So again, these criteria are a bit more around those who are writing a K with the mission of having an R01. A small K to a short K to a larger K can be different, but the R01 is basically you're asking for $1.5 million. A baby 4-year R01 is $1.5 million basically, between direct and indirect costs. So you're justifying that type of award. And then the extent to which the mentors contribute to their change, and as well. And again, don't feel too stuck into a narrow range, but you don't want to get overextended or diluted. Research plan, okay? Quality of the research, design, methodology, significance, and technical merit. Is the research plan relevant to what you want to do, appropriate for your stage? Now here, what happens too is if your research plan doesn't sing, it's a double hit, because, okay, the research plan, this person should have known this is not the right way to do this. So that's a problem. A bigger problem is that the mentors should have known this is not the way to do it, which basically says either the mentors are not of good quality or they're not engaged. So you've just gotten clobbered on both yourself and your mentors. And that's not uncommon. That happens with a K award, because these two things are coming in synchrony. So it's just, they all have to come together. A lot of it follows the same format as an proposal. Again, it's not going to be groundbreaking in many cases because they're not giving you enough money to do groundbreaking research, but it's a substrate for your career development as well as a contribution to the field. And I would argue that in a K, you really are looking for research that has brush points, things that could go several different possibilities. It's going to go one of them, I just don't know which one, but it opens doors as opposed to narrowing down into one tiny stream. But you've got to make sure that, if you have any make or break points, that can be a problem, because, okay, it's the same like any other series of aims. If aim 1 doesn't work, if you don't have aim 2, it's called a fatal flaw. Don't submit it. Basically, it's just that simple. You just can't. No one will buy it if you can do a 6 month of work in aim 1. If it doesn't work, you have no rest. You simply don't submit it. It's just that it'll never get there. So you have to have an idea that has some feasibility of all of the things that you're proposing, that you really can get them all within the time frame. Then we have the mentors, co-mentors, consultants, collaborators. I call it the mentoring cloud. And here you can see, I won't go through all of them. You've got the slides, you'll have the slides, but it's really the idea of each of these people that you're surrounding yourself with. Do they play a different role? Do they play a key role? So one way or the other, you have to have one, sometimes two people that are equal in terms of really you're getting the most from. Then you may have this series of co-mentors that these are people you're going to be engaged with during the whole time, but perhaps not in only one piece. You can also have consultants. A consultant is someone like a statistician, someone that they're not going to be mentoring you the whole time. You're going to work with them episodically. You'll learn some things from them, but they're not engaged in the same way. A collaborator is basically someone who you're collaborating with. And this may be someone at your same stage, but this is someone who's providing a research contribution that you're not going to need to do yourself. So it's okay, and so you'll see, these kind of things. And in typical, K awards, you can have anywhere from 2 to 6 or 7 of these types of individuals. Again, depending on the duration and what all you need to get. So it varies a whole lot between applications. One caution: if you've worked with someone for a long period of time, and they've been a mentor for you a long time, reviewers are going to be skeptical of the fact that, well, what more do you need to get from them? And you're not taking any risks. You're not developing. You're not changing. So if you're continuing to work with someone you've worked with for a long time, typically you want to downplay them and actually expand on the new things you're going to be getting. Particularly if you're working with anyone closely, you've got to show how your work will differentiate you from them and from their approaches. Okay. It's actually, common and encouraged many times to actually spend some time off-site from a primary training site, or have people who are not part of your university. That's much more common and much more accepted these days. In some cases, almost expecting that, particularly clinicians who have much more of a tendency to have training a long period of time at the same institution, it's almost expected that you got to get outside of the cocoon and get out into the real world. So I think of, for each person, there really are 4 elements you're trying to convey very compactly. Who they are, what are they good at, what will you get from them, and how will you get it? Those are the 4 elements that, as a reviewer, you're looking for. And I'm really not looking for titles. I'm really not looking for all this. I am looking for a succinct explanation of, what is this person really good at? How do you know them? How will you get something from them, and what's the process by which you'll get it? And it literally, in most cases, it's down to very explicit, so-and-so, we will be meeting, every week for an hour, during this phase of training. At other points, it may be more intense, but they're really looking for very, very explicit amounts of time and locations. Environment and review criteria, the last one. This is a little more variable depending on the type of K you're applying for, but these are the criteria. Like, is the institution's commitment to the career development of the candidate appropriately strong? Appropriately strong for the type of relationship. Are the facilities there? Is the environment there? And environment is not necessarily just, equipment. It's also the right kinds of people coming through, give seminars, the right kind of journal clubs, the right kind of seminar series. That this is a whole part of the training. And again, it varies a little bit depending on if you're staying at the same institution. Some Ks are actually more designed to go off and somewhere else, and so it can vary quite a bit, but it's got to be there. All right. Let me just give one more slide, then we'll break for a minute so you can stop listening to me and people have a few questions. But right from the start, I want to kind of give you a heads up. This won't apply today, but the one thing to keep in mind is, as you go from this K to an R1 transition, I find that people many times don't realize how big of a transition that is. And you're going from a small research program, because you're going to the point of being a PI of an R1, say, okay, I'm ready to lead this research program, to develop my own research program. So the data you have to acquire during the K, and I don't mean just the laboratory or the research data, It's the data about your capabilities, about the ability to lead and develop a team. So these are the things that during the K you have to be thinking about in preparation for the next award. So again, just a little heads up, something to think about that many times I'm finding people are not thinking quite aggressively enough into the future. Okay, so let me just stop right there for a minute. And anybody have questions they want to ask? I'll take a drink of water.
Any questions? You can either just unmute and ask Rick or put it into the chat box. All right,
Okay, all
Rick,
right.
you are so incredibly clear.
Yeah.
No one has any questions. It's perfect.
Yeah, no, that's the beauty of Zoom. You can tune out whenever you want to.
I was, I don't want to, if there's more, I don't want to slow down the presentation.
No, go ahead. That's fine. Go ahead, Benjamin.
Regarding the science, so you kind of had mentioned as an example, like, hey, you might be really interested in GWAS, but you have to put it in the context of solving this bigger problem. You know, you can't just say like, oh, I'm interested in GWAS for GWAS's sake. You know, kind of balancing things like that. Like if you're like, you know, oh, I could solve this problem. I can solve part of this problem now, and I feel like the technique isn't quite up to solving the whole problem. And so part of my focus is advancing the technical aspect of the field. Is that something that would have a place in a K, or would that be considered off topic or too ambitious that a trainee would be able to do that?
Great question, really. Yeah, and that goes the, I guess that becomes, the way I would see it is, comes down to this storyline. And you hear, what we're always talking now when looking at writing is how you create a storyline. So if you can create a storyline that this technical is something I can do, it just takes time, then it can be really interesting from the standpoint of, okay, and when I did it, it will open up, way of doing this somehow better. If your storyline is that, well, a lot of people have tried to solve this technical problem, no one's been able to do it, I'm going to give it a shot. That's like, okay, then, all right, 30 other people have tried to do it. I haven't made it. Okay, Benjamin, what's your secret sauce here? So you can see the different storyline that goes in there, but you can also, if it's a side piece, that's one you can put it on the side. Here is what the core of what I'm going to be doing. As a side piece, the world is struggling. Our field is struggling with being able to do this. So I'm going to see, I have a new idea how to solve this. I'm going to put some time into it, but my mainstream is not going to be dependent on it. Okay, so I could see a way you could craft that story, but you don't want to make your life dependent on solving the technical problem. I lived that as a postdoc, so take that as advice, whether for writing or reality. Be careful. It can be great, but if it doesn't work, it can be tough. That help?
Yes, thank you.
Cool, sure.
A question in the chat too, it looks like.
Sure, could you read it?
Good news. Do you want to read it, Benjamin, or you want me to read it?
I don't feel like
I'll read it.
I'm the role.
You're
sure you are, just grab it.
That's fine, I got it. Is it preferred to have multiple co-mentors and collaborators? Is there an ideal number? Is only having a single mentor discouraged, or does it depend on the plan?
Yeah. Next question, please. Yeah. No, it's fascinating because, again, how the culture has changed. And the culture has changed from literally when I got a K award, I had a mentor. Yeah, but that was back in the dark ages. Now it's almost the assumption is that, well, if you can get everything you need from one person, you're really not stretching. So I think it's somewhere in between. I think typically that and each of them there for a role. I think the big thing is to think about any person that is part of that team. They're playing a role, and that role is what matters, not the person. and the magnitude of that role may be different. So in other words, you may have a co-mentor around one aim of a new technology learning. Let's say you're moving a clinical study and adding qualitative methodology. You'll have one co-mentor who is a qualitative research expert. They'll play that role, and no one else in your team can play that role. So you don't want people with overlapping roles, because then it just becomes kind of cumbersome. Typically, I would say we see somewhere, I'd say more like three or four is kind of a minimum I've seen. I haven't seen any ones lately. I don't know, Amy, have you ever seen any single mentor applications lately?
No, it is more common to have multiple mentors. I think the key is that there's definitely too many mentors, because then it just seems like the effort is diluted. And however many mentors you have, you need to have a very clear, as Rick said, role for each mentor and a very clear communication plan. Because if you may be meeting with each of your mentors, but if you have 3 mentors and each of them has a little different idea of what you should do, and you're meeting individually with each one, that can result in a very confused career development plan. So it is important to describe how you're going to communicate with those mentors and how those mentors are going to communicate with each other, preferably with a group meeting with all of the mentors and you at a minimum quarterly, to make sure that everybody is on the same page.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The ping pong diplomacy is fraught with problems along the way. It's interesting. Different people have different views in terms of how frequently. One of which is just physically, and actually virtually, it may be easier than since we haven't even tried to get people together, physically anymore. But I think that you kind of think about what is the rate of change. Rate of movement. So for example, if you're doing a clinical study and the movement is not very fast of the data coming out or what have you, there may be times that, it may not be, as frequently you need to meet, or there may be some subsets sometimes that meets. But again, it's got to be, it's got to make sense, and it's got to be coordinated from that standpoint. Cool.
If there's time, I'll ask another question. I don't want to monopolize though.
Okay, quick one, and then we'll move on.
As far as how you can use, there's some money in the K, but not a lot. That's not salary. I'm curious, what are some ways that one could use that would be looked on favorably? One possibility being using it for things like, oh, for my experiments, I need to use like these reagents or these resources in the lab, and I'm going to pay for it. Or would that be like, oh, how come your institution's not committed you to giving these things for free? And also a possibility of like collecting pilot data as a side aim, or is that like too ambitious?
Yeah, the portions of that, I've never seen very much restrictions on that. It's what makes sense. The bottom line at the end of the day is what makes sense. I think they're going to be expecting some of that money to actually be engaged in your career development. It's going to allow you to go to meetings you might not be able to go to. It allows you to go to a Gordon conference and get immersed in the field. It allows you to go spend a month at the best lab in the world in this. And so, they're expecting typically that some of that is be able to, because that isn't something many times institutions will pay for. And since it's a mentored award, the assumption is there's money there largely for the research, but sometimes it makes sense especially it's something a little peripheral to try. So it's basically what makes sense. And I've seen very little comment on that in most cases. All right, so let's move on. So the bottom line is really you're telling a story, and I think of it in the ultimate, I call it cognitive control. You're trying to control the thinking of a reviewer, kind of like a mystery novelist who is writing a story you can't put down. Hopefully this is nonfiction, what you're writing, but you're really trying to hold on to the reader of the thinking. And half the time, you're actually anticipating what they might be thinking. So it's almost a metacognitive experiment, which is a lot of what we're actually doing in the group. Well, you know, when I read this passage, I think what a reviewer is going to be thinking when they read this is this. Do you want them thinking about this? And so you're really about this. And if there's a controversy in the field, that's the most difficult one, because you have to walk the line between kind of, you know, maybe taking one of the two sides of the controversy without dissing the other or pretending no one will know about the other, because you know for sure that they will. So it's how do you approach that? Like I said with Benjamin, okay, no one will be able to solve this problem. Well, here I come. I'm going to solve the problem. Yeah, right. Better give me some evidence that you're going to, kind of a thing. And you're writing these different kinds of reviewers. And again, this is where you get into the writing styles and the writing requirements. I'll give you some tools for this. How many of you remember from back in, you know, elementary or secondary, the idea of a topic sentence for a paragraph? Way back when, you know, we kind of learned this. How many of you think when you're about writing a proposal, okay, what is the topic sentence of my paragraph and what role will that topic sentence play? And then when I'm done with that paragraph, has everything in that paragraph flowed from that topic sentence? We don't do that very much. But that's where the feedback process we'll get to is really critical. So that, because if I'm reading, so for example, I'm reading a topic sentence, I'm expecting to be a topic sentence, okay, here's where I'm going. I get halfway through the paragraph, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait a minute, how did my brain get here? This isn't what I thought I'd be reading. By the end of the paragraph, now where am I? I have no idea where I went in the flow of that paragraph. What happens when you counter that? My brain shuts down. Basically, I'm not going to work that hard if you can't write a coherent paragraph. So that's why the precision of the writing becomes so critical as you go. A little bit on each of the sections. From the scientific standpoint, the specific aims basically defines the project. And almost invariably, from the science standpoint, most reviewers will tell you by the time I've read that specific aims page, I've made up my mind. I've made up my mind at a minimum of, okay, this is one that's kind of interesting. I'm looking forward to reading it. This one, I guess I have to keep reading so I can write down why I don't like it. That is how quickly people are making impressions. So when we're in our groups and working on aims pages, we may spend a month, 6 weeks on an aims page, refining it, because also once you have it, it's a miniature proposal. Everything else just expands from it. But the concept of writing it is using what we call the funnel. So in an aims page, you're starting out from here's the big picture, that first people, everybody gets it, and then it gradually funnels down in logic to a point where probably by the end, maybe only the first or second class reviewers are absolutely right in tune for you. But you've got to accomplish these things. What's the problem? What's the need? Why is it important? What's known from other person? What's unknown? What is the questions and hypotheses you're going to be testing? All of this is happening in a very short period of writing, which is extremely difficult to write. You know, and so learning that style is not easy. That's where feedback from people who are used to writing that is critical. The bulleted list of aims themselves, which you've all seen, I'm sure, those are stylistically quite variable. They range from everything. You sometimes see what I call as a naked aim. Here's the aim. Here's aim 1. Here's aim 2. Here's aim 3. Yeah, I refer to those as naked aims because they don't tell me anything about how you're going to accomplish them. If you've set up everything so that it's so perfectly clear how you're going to go about it, you can get by with those. If not, and that's a hard style to write to. Typically your aim is, here's my aim, here's a little bit about how I'm going to accomplish it, here's what I expect to see. Here's another aim, here's how I'm going to do it, and here's what I'm going to expect to see. So you got a little bit more information, but it's miniaturized, and it's the core pieces that a person wants. By the end of the page, they want to have a general idea of the entire scope of the proposal. In R-type grants, there are this impact statement, which is the last 2, sometimes 3 sentences. But in K proposals, typically there's also a nod to the impact of the career development. And different people have different styles, but somewhere on the page, you want a reader to know what is the career development going to look like. So again, their brain leaves this page with a pretty good snapshot of exactly what they're going to be hearing more about and the logic and why it fits together. So it's, again, it's you know, the crystal clear why the research you're doing is important, why someone should be wanting to solve this problem, and how you're going to be different at the end of the K, ready to move off into a next stage of your career. The significance is, you know, the next section, just a little history. That came from, I guess now probably, feels like yesterday, probably 10 years ago, that NIH shifted from what we used to call the background and significance into this significance. But it really is still the background and significance, but with a very narrowly tailored background. Sometimes people read significance, they think, well, I just have to talk about why this is important. No, you have to lead the reader to evidence for why what you want to do is important. And so the background is the context behind the question and the logic path to essentially get the reader to know why it's important to pursue this. And so that's, you're creating the logic flow, the path to the hypothesis, the path to why this is important research to be done. And basically, it's an expansion of what's in the Ames page. That's why the Ames page is so critical, because now background just expanded. And sometimes people hesitate and realize, well, isn't that boring? Is that redundant? It may be, but boy, it's easy to follow. You know, and so as a reader, I'm reading the Ames page, I'm expecting the details to show up, and I'm expecting them to show up in the same cognitive order as in the Ames page. I don't want to have to work any harder than I have to. And it's lovely if I can look at this significance and see headers that says, in this paragraph next section, I'll read about that. I'll read about this importance of this problem. I know it's important. Next. So it's almost like I can skip things I don't need to read by you telling me, if I read this, here's what I'm going to learn about. Okay, that's something I need to read about. So it's literally giving people mileposts, the signals of what's going to be in these sections if I read them. Sometimes preliminary data will actually show up in significance, or at least a context of where the preliminary data are coming and why they're important. Many times preliminary data make or break the logic for what you're proposing. So if they're critical to the logic and the evidence and the behind what you want to do, bringing them in the significance, or at least expanding on them, is okay, even if you then have a preliminary data section in later on. Typically, this would be a page, page and a half for K. Work has to be significant, even if it's not highly innovative, which leads to innovation. And this is a new section that was introduced same time that the significance was revised. And the whole idea of trying to give it as thinking about work that is really going to be more innovative, more novel, something different, not just same old, same old. It's not a review criteria for K Awards. So typically people are still putting it in as a section, but don't think the bar is high. This is not going to be the what's going to make or break. It can't be mundane, but again, as I said with Benjamin, if the risk is too high, okay, you're in trouble if it doesn't work. So again, these are something that it's a section that it is sometimes a little hard to separate out from significance, but it's novelty versus importance, I think, is another way of seeing how these two are really quite different. And then you get into the approach, which is really essentially copy and paste your aims. Here's how I'm going to be doing it. Sometimes here's how I'm going to achieve them. That sounds corny, but it's absolutely critical. In fact, I've seen sometimes where aims may change, they get solidified in an aims page. By the time the approach has been done, the aims have actually morphed, but someone forgot to go back and change them in the aims page. So all of a sudden the aims page have one set of aims and the approach have a different set, and that's going to blow up. You don't want that to happen. And so that's why the importance of them. And while the approach and significance most closely align with the impact of our proposals, I'm not aware of any evidence of any particular categories of the review criteria that are most predictive of the primary score of the K Awards. The biggest thing is all of these things can really knock you down. The biggest one, most common I see, is career development is not adequately developed, is not important enough, and that will sink a K proposal. So when do you start writing? And this isn't really as appropriate for all of you because you've got deadlines can be our friends, but I added just for future reference is how you get started from writing. And it's really start from the research questions. You have to have a good question. You know, it's important to start writing until you know what it is. Do you have hypotheses? Write them down. What info will answer your question have? Write it down. If you can't write those down, those 3 questions, you're not ready to write. You got nothing to write about. And so these are the things that actually design very simple ways that you can get feedback and conversations with people to get those finalized. Then you can begin to write them down. So it's writing, when you start writing is really critical. All right, so I mentioned that, this, about this, it's really moving into, okay, this is nice, it's complicated, how do I learn it? And that's why we really moved into a number of years ago, this idea of thinking about this as a really perfect example of high order teaching and learning development. And through, again, through, as you'll see at the end, I refer to as what's called pathological grant-seeking behavior. When there's money on the table, you can't help yourself. So in the previous economic disaster time, there was a bunch of money made available through supplements, like they did with COVID. And so there was some money for one of the grants I could write a supplement to get someone to help us kind of teach this stuff and make it a little bit easier. And I call them enduring materials. I had no idea what that meant, but I felt like there's something missing that I wasn't doing enough of. So I encountered a guy named Carl Keller, who's a communications expert. His wife actually works at Northwestern, and put out this proposal looking for tools to help people write grants. Could somebody help us? And Carl said, I do a lot of teaching and writing, so maybe I can help you out. What's a grant? And literally, Carl had no scientific background. He had no experience. And I'd start writing, and basically we gave him examples of a number of funded proposals, went away and came back. Oh, he said, this will be easy. You guys write really boring, repetitive ways. And I said, well, I don't know, I just write. He said, no, it's okay. Every field writes in certain ways. You just have to understand how that writing takes place and what it looks like, so you can essentially understand the structure of the writing, what he referred to as rhetorical patterns. For the first time, I began to understand the difference between rhetoric and writing. Rhetoric are the patterns that are unique to a particular field, whereas writing is a more general process. And so Carl created these fabulous 15-minute voiceover PowerPoints that we've been using now for literally probably 10 or 12 years. And that it amounts to kind of deconstructing how you think about what you're writing. And it essentially is what reviewers are expecting to see, and which they're judging whether or not you belong, whether or not you are ready to be one of us. And it's, in other ways, it's what we refer to as cultural capital. It's the things that people bump into, they may be learned. Like with my original chair, he taught me these things without necessarily knowing what he was doing. At the time, you literally have no idea this is what you're doing. And so this is a link to where these resources are, given time and technology. I'm not going to try to go out to them, but I want to show you some screenshots. Okay, so this is, you can see the URL up there. It's northwestern.edu/climb. And so this is a website of a program that I lead. It's a professional development series for early career PhD students. And what you're looking at there, in case you're wondering, in the foreground, that's the Northwestern campus up in Evanston. And way down the background, that's the Chicago skyline. So my office is down in the, when I'm there, I haven't been there in 4 months. What's an office? I haven't been there since March, like so many of us haven't been. So theoretically, my office is down there, which I will get back to. Then if you go to the link that says resources, and these are some series of 3 pages, and you go to written communications, you come to this page. And this page has a series, are the links to, we have our own Climb YouTube channel, believe it or not. We're not getting any viral explosions, but some of them have like 15, 20,000 downloads and views. So they're really seen as very helpful. The first 2, the 5 principles of writing readable sentences and creating coherent paragraphs, topics, and echo words and transitions, those 2 15-minute videos completely changed how I write. No exaggeration in terms of writing proposals in particular. The key one for the introducing the ways of approaching Ames pages are Ames pages part 1, rhetorical patterns. The part 2 on specific aims is not quite as useful, but it really will help show examples of the logic of how specific aims can be put together. So if you go to the one on part 1 of the rhetorical patterns and spend some time through it, this is basically a deconstructed top half of an Ames page, a la Carl Keller. And what you'll see as you go through it is a deconstruction of the role that every sentence is playing in creating a rhetorical kind of a storyline. So these are all about storylines you're creating. And you can see, you know, at the top, so you've got something that has a long-term goal, then something that gives a general context, and then have something that Carl pointed out called the complication. It's the however. You know, this is what people think. However, we don't know this. Then you get some narrowing. And then kind of, so this entire flow is coming down through it. And it's, I can't do it justice. You have to really, you know, listen to it again. 15 minutes is a real cheap use of your time. And then it'll really display it out. One caution is that the 2 examples that we happen to pick inadvertently had bigger sections on the qualifications stress. If you look down there at the bottom of the page, those are overblown. So don't look at those as a really good template unless you're, you know, unless for some reason you think the reviewer won't believe you can do it. So those are overblown too much. But when Carl did this, 2 different examples, guess what? The pieces are all there. They're just rearranged a little differently. So then this becomes essentially a template for the general construct of the half-page, 2/3 page introductions to Ames pages. And when you sit through it and walk it through, a lot of these things say, oh yeah, if I, you know, this makes perfect sense. So literally we have many people that will just print this particular slide, you know, and put it up on their wall to remind themselves as they're writing the Ames page, what's the logic, what's the flow that's happening here. So this is what moved on to kind of, this is now, if you think about teaching, so essentially you're writing so that you're trying to make what we call a bid for recognition as legitimate within this community of practice. And so this writing patterns is people recognize it, they say, oh yeah, I've seen this before, this person knows how to do it. Furthermore, they've got mentors that have taught them, so everything is good. Everything is happy at that point. But if you think about how teaching and learning takes place, I'm kind of laying some things out for you. Okay, so I'm demonstrating something, giving you some new knowledge. So, but that you're acquiring it, but how do you do anything with it? No one has become a star tennis player by watching videos. You get out there and you practice, but you have to practice with feedback. And that's where short workshops and many times even mentoring feedback can fall short, because you can't do it if you get feedback. Otherwise you're just kind of in this dead circle in most cases. And so that's where we use peer groups or alone. There, but it has to be from experts. So a group of say postdocs or junior faculty could get together, they give each other advice, but it can be the blind leading the blind. You need someone who's more experienced with it, and that's why you build in some kind of a back from people who do it. And the feedback process is can be very fast if it's done right. So think about, I'm going to kind of the last section kind of leave you with is think about how do you get feedback. And so I'm going to argue that oral feedback, especially in the early phase of writing, is probably better and much more efficient than written feedback if you've got someone who can give you feedback and if you can condition them to do it that way. Both helpful. It's not either or. So you think about written feedback, a person can really think about it. They can write different alternatives. They can give you some explanation, can be thoughtful, considering alternatives. So it can be a very thoughtful, kind of a process, but it has some real limitations. Many times it's hard to get detail and focus. And typing is extremely slow process, and you tend to put in very limited details. It can be very slow, and it's very difficult to get large pieces of writing. I'm sure some of you have experience with sending something off to a mentor for feedback and getting a comment back that says, looks fine to me, which basically says I didn't have time to read it, or says this paragraph is awkward. Okay, well, what do I do with that? But think about if you said, okay, well, tell me what's awkward for you. Oh, this is what's awkward for me. All of a sudden you get a much, much fuller picture of what actually is the problem. Oral feedback, by contrast, has some, has some strengths, but also some limitations. It can be much more rapid. So, for example, in the writing groups that I lead, we literally, it's almost all virtually oral feedback to begin with. Someone will hand out a copy of their Ames page, we'll read the first paragraph, then we'll talk about it. So I can say, okay, when I read this paragraph, this is what my brain is doing. Now, this is my first impression. This is the first impression a reader is going to be able to have. So I can literally explain to you the cognition that your writing has done. We can have several people can, give feedback. Well, when I read it, this is what I read. Oh, okay, I can see how you read something different. And so you can really, you can explain the reactions that people are getting. But you have to be able to think out loud and realize that this is all rapidly moving. It's kind of temporary. I may think about it tomorrow. I said, no, I really think this would be a better way of submitting. So it's very rapid. You have to be able to be comfortable that, thinking out loud it's a fluid. It's not necessarily final. If I say something, if I say what I'm hearing, it's my initial reaction. I might think about it more and come up with a different one. Not everyone's comfortable with that kind of spontaneous reactions. And so you need to, but you can even do this one-on-one. With mentor, I do this with individuals as much as I do it with groups. But you have to have a capture conversation, because if we're talking back and forth and you're trying to take notes, you're not listening, you're not engaging in the conversation. So we actually do a recording process to capture everything. We use a combination of group and single expert. And a group, again, I've kind of alluded to the fact that in a group of 3 to 4, we can get a whole lot done, and a whole lot can happen in a period of 30 minutes on dialogue on an Ames page. Literally, we have times you may all of a sudden the entire Ames page can completely shift over a period of 30 minutes of dialogue, because it's a dialogue, and you can actually play with and practice. Well, if you're talking about doing this with a subject sample of 15, I don't believe you can get any kind of significant results. How did you come up with 15? Well, I haven't quite figured out the number yet. Well, go away and figure it out. And so you can get this kind of very rapid dialogue. And what's happening, the vicarious learning from people in groups is incredibly powerful, because everyone else is engaging and they're practicing, as well, because they can see things on your proposal that you can't. You can see things on their proposal that they can't. Right? So that's the basic premise. So I'm going to, that's a kind of a quick synopsis. But again, I would really encourage you, if you have people who are willing to engage in, oral feedback. So you've got a mentor on your K where it says, I've got my Ames page. I'll send it to you, but I don't really want you to read it. I want you to, I'll bring it with me. I'll send it to you. I want to just sit down and talk about it. I want to hear what your brain is thinking as you read through it. I want to capture your thinking, so you don't have to waste a lot of time of typing. Some people can do it, some people don't, but at least try it sometime. It's really, really valuable. So what do you all do with this? Number one, don't feel bad if you don't know how to write proposals. No way you should. And it's like any other skill to master. But you have to learn and understand skills. This is just not do it over and over like things, but you're looking for how you develop skills. This feedback, especially feedback on small pieces of early writing. The last thing you want to do is spend a week polishing an Ames page only to sit down with someone to find, hey, wait a minute, this has a fatal flaw you're not picking up on. You just wasted a whole bloody week. Get feedback on short pieces of writing in the critical elements early on. Okay, my career development plan. Let me just give you an outline. Here are the 4 things that I want to come out of here, and here's how I'm going to do it. It's purely as an outline. I can look at those. I can give you feedback on it. Get your feedback in early pieces of writing. Again, writing groups are great, not always equally easy to get to them. Let's see. I think not much more I haven't kind of hit on here. Again, it's teaching and learning. Informal mentoring can be great if it works, but I think we've hit on all of those. So you'll have the slides if you want, but I want to make sure we have at least 10 minutes or so for any more questions and answer. So there's a whole lot to digest in an hour and 15 minutes. So what do you want to know more about? I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
If if it's easier for people, you could send me the, you can send me by chat your question and I'll just read it. If that,
Yep, and I popped open the chat box too now, so I can see it too. So either oral or written, I do both.
So Rick, one of the questions that has come up for before from some of our scholar applicants is, if there isn't really anyone at your institution other than your mentor that you think may be a good person to go over your writing with, is there a way to identify other people that you might be able to engage as an external mentor or external advisor?
And I think as long as you have, if you have an expert in the field, in your mentor, who's able and willing to give you good feedback, don't underestimate the value of a colleague. And the colleague, because what the colleague can do is they can spot, if they engage, they can spot the things that says, okay, you left me at this sentence, this next sentence, I have no idea how you got from this sentence to this sentence. Because what happens there is, you as a writer, you know all of that paragraph of material in between that is not written down. And so you're asking them to do certain things, not necessarily say critiquing the science, but you're asking them to read for the storyline, read for the logic. So in that case, they're giving you, that kind of, how do I understand what you're saying, and how does it read as a story? But again, I think there, keep your asks narrow. So don't give them a 12-page proposal and ask them to do that. We literally never work with more than a page or two at a time, because you can't hold that focus. And again, potentially do it in this oral format. So let's just get together and let's do it. Okay, we each have an Ames page. Let's just take turns. Okay, I will read your Ames page. I'll read a paragraph, read the whole thing. Here is what I find myself wondering. Here is the things that are clear to me. Here are the things that are not clear to me. So it's a different kind of a writing and feedback process, which peers and colleagues can be actually very helpful with, as long as you have another person, because that your advisor could very well have the same blind spots that you're trying to watch out for. Maybe it's somebody you know from a previous incarnation, a previous chapter of your, that is kind of in the field, and they have to be close enough. So in other words, when we do our writing groups, we separate out basic scientists from clinical researchers from social behavioral, because as basic scientists, I'm not going to have a sociologist reviewing my proposal, so I'm not trying to make it completely intelligible for a social scientist. So you have to be a little careful that whoever you're asking replicates somewhat the type of person who's going to be reading it. That's one thing that you have to be a little careful of.
Great. Any other questions?
This is Brenda. I just want to say we're all looking forward to reading your proposals. So good luck.
I know it's a lot, but I think, again, with particularly the videos, spending the time just kind of, like I say, 15 minutes is a pretty short investment to help with the structural aspects of the writing. And again, the science, you're gonna have to get people who are in the field to give you the the solid, and you're looking for really good solid feedback. You're not looking for people to pat you on the back. You're looking for people to be highly critical, but in a scientifically critical, not in, oh, I don't like this. It's like, well, here are the problems I see. Here are the limitations. Here where I see you're going to have trouble convincing. You're looking for people as colleagues to really give you feedback and discussion of the science, because you got to have that before it gets submitted, not after.